Hey, thanks for joining me today. My name is Brad Rhodes. I'm the Amazon best-selling author of Protecting Your Retirement. In this book, and specifically in this video, we're going to talk about IRA distribution planning. Actually, we're going to do a three-part video series on IRA distribution planning. Now, I kind of laugh at that because I realize that most of us, including myself, would probably rather plan a trip to Florida, to Europe, down to the coast, whatever. But I want to try to, not try, but kind of convince you that this stuff's pretty daggone important. I want to start out by reading a little article. It's an article titled Why Retirement Planning is Like Climbing Mount Everest. It's written by a guy named Nick Deffenthaler. And I'm going to just jump right into this article. I think it leads into exactly what I want to talk about. So let's get started. Mount Everest, one of the most beautiful natural wonders in the world, with an elevation of just over 29,000 feet, is the highest mountain above sea level. As you would expect, climbing Mount Everest is a challenging and dangerous feat. Sadly, over 375 people have lost their lives making the trek. However, one thing that might surprise you is that the vast majority who have died on the mountain didn't pass away while climbing to the top. Believe it or not, the climb down or descent has caused the greatest fatalities. Case in point, Eric Arnold was a multiple Mount Everest climber who sadly died in 2016 on one of his climbs. Before he passed, he was interviewed by a local media outlet and was quoted as saying, "2/3 of the accidents happen on the way down. If you get euphoric and think, I've reached my goal, the most dangerous part is still ahead of you." Eric's quote struck me, and I couldn't help but think of the parallels his words had with retirement planning. And then I'm going to read just a couple more segments of this article. Even though you've reached the peak of the mountain, aka retirement, we must recognize that the work is far from over. There are still monumental financial decisions that will be made during the years you aren't working that most of us cannot afford to get wrong. And then the last part here, it says, as with those who climb Mount Everest, many financial plans that are in good shape when entering retirement can easily be derailed on the descent or when funds start to be withdrawn from your portfolio, aka the decumulation. Now I call that the distribution. The distribution or the decumulation phase of retirement planning. A quality financial and investment strategy does not end at retirement. This is when proper planning becomes even more critical, especially during periods of uncertainty and market volatility like we're currently experiencing. I thought that was just a really good article. And so that leads me into, again, this first video. Why is IRA distribution planning so important anyway? So I want to make about 5 points here. I'll make them pretty fast so you can get on that planning that trip down to the coast. But number one, my first point is, most financial advisors, they talk about IRA contributions and accumulation, and they talk about accumulation, but they don't talk about distribution. And accumulation is important. I mean, for the last number of years, I've been contributing to an IRA type account. It's called a SEP account. If you're self-employed, you're able to contribute to a what's called a SEP, or oh my gosh, I'm having a brain like a self-employment pension. My goodness, self-employment pension account, and I contributed that to kind of offset some of the taxes I have to pay every year. But it's important to put that money in and hopefully let it accumulate for you. And a lot of people have done the same thing with their 401ks and IRAs. Accumulation is important. But when you get into retirement years, knowing the rules, when to start taking out of that thing, how to best set it up to make sure it lasts throughout your retirement, I would certainly say that is of utmost importance when you get to retirement years. And that's what we're going to talk about. In video number 2, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but in video number 2, we're going to talk about the specific rules The Secure Act was passed back a few years ago in Washington. They've already made changes to it, but the Secure Act has changed the age when you have to start taking out of that IRA, and it just makes a difference. It'll make a difference knowing these rules. So we'll get into that in video number 2. But number 1, I would say the distribution phase of your IRA is important to know those rules. Number 2 is pensions. So pensions, for the most part, are a thing of the past. A generation or 2 ago, when someone retired from their work, they retired, maybe they got their gold watch, but they got a pension, a paycheck that would come into their checking account or into their mailbox every single month. They had their Social Security, so they had 2 sources of income. Well, today, the pensions are, for the most part, they're gone. Back in the 80s, when 401ks got really popular, what it allowed employers to do was kind of take the monkey off of their back and put the money on your back, meaning that, these big companies were paying out these pensions, and people are living longer and longer and longer. They're paying out all these pensions to all these retirees. So they switched that in most cases to a 401k type model where you can contribute, the employer can possibly match, but when you retire, it's kind of up to you to make sure that money lasts throughout your retirement. And it's not all bad. There's a lot of good things to the current system. But my point is, people don't have these pensions anymore. It's a little bit trickier to make sure that money lasts throughout their retirement. So it's very important to take this stuff seriously. Number 3, inflation. So, over the years, when I've heard people talk about inflation, I was always like, yeah, I get it. Things are going to be more expensive down the road. But I think most of us have really experienced firsthand inflation. Just a simple example is going to the grocery store. You look at what you have in your cart and you look at what you just paid, and you're like, my gosh, I don't have a lot to show for all the money I just spent out. Another big part of that, especially what I see every day, are healthcare costs. I'll kind of zoom in on prescriptions. So a big part of what I've done over the years is help people with their Medicare supplements, and Medicare Advantage plans. And these prescriptions have, especially the name brand type prescriptions, a lot of times have gotten out of hand. And so the costs just keep going up. I'm not going to use today to necessarily pick on the pharmaceutical industry, but I kind of believe that this pharmaceutical industry, they're going to make their money, and they kind of pass on the cost to consumers. And so some of these miracle drugs that some people take just gotten kind of expensive. My point is, I think we're going to see inflation as we get older, as time goes by. We're going to be needing more money to pay for some of these high dollar items. And so again, that's my whole point is this IRA distribution thing is pretty important. Number 4 is what I've witnessed is a lot of people that IRA account is their largest account. A lot of times bigger than their home or their property. And so it just, in my opinion, the larger that account is, it just makes sense to make sure you protect it, to make sure that it's going to last throughout your lifetime. I don't necessarily want to make this a commercial about what we do, but we're able to show people how to make sure that money lasts throughout their retirement, have some guarantees in place. Again, we're talking about the market volatility, not just the market, but the world in general, volatile world we live in, the uncertainty. We show people how to make sure that IRA lasts throughout their lifetime. And then number 5 is longevity risk. So longevity risk is just basically saying that we're living longer. The life expectancy has really increased. And so a lot of times people are living up into their 80s, up into their 90s. And longevity risk really talks about the problem of people outliving their savings. And so that's a big part of what I talk about to folks every day. I'll give you a little story. So a couple weeks ago, my wife and her sister set up a party for their dad, who just recently turned 85 years of age. And we kind of congregated on our back screened-in porch. My wife bought this banner that talked about all the things going on back in 1939. You may remember 1939, 85 years ago, that's when Gone with the Wind came out. That's when The Wizard of Oz came out. So it's a great time in Hollywood, I'm sure. But the thing that struck me on that banner, it talked about the life expectancy in 1939. In 1939, the life expectancy was a little over 63 years of age. So, and what's interesting is, I think this is correct, when Social Security first started, you could not start drawing your Social Security until age 65. Today you can start drawing at age 62, but back when Social Security first started, you started drawing at age 65. The typical person was not even going to start drawing their Social Security because they weren't going to live to age 65. So I just thought that was interesting. Today, again, we're living well up into our 80s and 90s. And so all these things combined, I think it just makes sense to make sure you get that IRA set up properly. Again, in the next video, we're going to talk about knowing the rules of the IRA, the required minimum distribution tables, the Secure Act, rollovers, making sure you do it properly, making sure you're not taxed when you do a rollover. If you do it properly, it's a non-taxable event. We're going to talk about Roth versus traditional IRAs, and then we're also going to talk about Roth conversion. So hopefully this has been a good start to this 3-part video series. Stay tuned to the next video, and we'll get into the rules of the IRA. We'll see you then.